One of the greatest lessons that I learned in ministry happened when I was a chaplain in the summer in the hospital. As you might remember, I served as a chaplain during the pandemic, making visits from room to room. Shielded and geared up in my face mask, eye shield, and at times in gown and gloves, I'd make my way down my 2 floors, stopping by to visit whoever I could. The majority of patients didn't know anything about chaplaincy or the spiritual care department. And some patients, after hearing that I was a religious person or a clergy member, would quickly say that they weren't religious, that they really didn't want to talk to me. A rare few would actually even shoo me out the door, cutting off the chance for a conversation altogether. However, one of my patients taught me something about the power of listening. After making my pitch, introducing that I was Alex from the spiritual care department, that I was a chaplain for the floor, stopping by to say hello and wanted to know how she was doing, I could tell that she wasn't quite sure what to make of me. "Oh, that's okay, honey," she said, looking at me suspiciously. "I get enough of the Bible from my Catholic sister." An older woman, I explained that I wasn't there to proselytize or that I wasn't coming with any hidden conversion agenda. Through opening up a conversation, the time eventually flew by and we settled into a nice chat. After a couple of visits, she and I would visit once or twice a week. We'd talk for almost an hour, delving deeper into her own stories and past. At times, we would laugh together, and in other moments, we would cry. Through my listening, I realized that she could have used, and she also realized that she could have used for a chaplain after all. She understood that all I was there to be was her chaplain, the one person that was there to just hold space. Not someone coming by to take her vitals or there to talk about her charts or treatments. I was simply there to just offer a simple gift, to listen. This lesson that there's truly a precious gift in listening is something that I think you've experienced yourself. Those moments when you're chatting with a friend for hours, feeling the warmth of your connection deep in your heart. Moments where someone asks you thoughtful questions, helping you to reflect on something churning over and over again in your mind. Other times when you've been moved to tears because of how closely someone listened, how you were able to bare your soul to somebody else, how sacred and vulnerable it felt to be so deeply heard, to feel listened to. There's something really special found in listening that we can offer one another. The important lesson, though, is how listening also is a gift that we can also offer ourselves. In fact, in order to be fully present in our listening, we must be present in our own bodies. The pandemic has made this lesson all the more needed. So many of us find ourselves sitting in front of screens all day, hopping from one Zoom room to the next. Many of us are feeling the fatigue from working so much from home, feeling like the veil between our work and our home lives is much thinner than it once was. We're noticing the soreness in our eyes and faces and the aches in our bones. We notice our tiredness when we feel hungry or thirsty, when we're feeling a bit cranky or irritable. We notice the familiar feelings of anxiousness and stress. Our bodies have all sorts of information for us should we simply choose to listen. So much of being able to focus outside of ourselves involves first taking stock of what's happening inside. And in our reading that Penny read for us, we hear words like non-judgmental, accepting, and curious when talking about mindfulness and presence. What we tend not to realize is how this same posture we think of holding for others is incredibly important for us to hold for ourselves. As authors Susan Smalley and Diana Winston write in their book Fully Present, when you are aware of the present moment in a kind and curious way, accepting it exactly as it is, then you have the direct experience of mindfulness. This is not to say that sometimes judging, aversion, and fear will not color your mindfulness, but that this is the ideal that you can aspire to through practice, to be as kind as possible to yourself and your experience. What I learned in that moment visiting the woman in the hospital was that I have to really be in tune with my own body and how I'm feeling in order to fully show up. This has become something that I see as so essential to ministry and also to living out mindful and present lives. To be able to truly listen, to quiet the thoughts of our minds, to be open, curious, accepting, non-judgmental. I had to give myself that same gift of listening. I had to check in with myself throughout the day, noticing and listening for when I was feeling in each moment. And today we're exploring the lessons that we can find through embodied listening. And those of you who have been attending Suzanne and Penny's Cultivating Embodied Listening course are already familiar with some of the science and thinking around embodied listening. It's a type of deep listening beyond just striving to fully understand the meaning of somebody else's words or taking in that as information. It's a deep listening to being attentive to many different things and showing up as fully present. Being aware of someone's facial expressions, posture, and tone. Noticing the feelings and sensations around the room. It's a listening with our own bodies, noticing how we are responding, noticing any pain or traumas that arise in the conversation, paying attention and honoring what comes up for us. This form of sacred listening is the bread and butter of chaplaincy. And it's a skill that's simple on one hand, but actually doing embodied listening takes a lot of practice. It involves a lot of self-reflection and feedback. It needs time to hone these skills, to notice the impulses that arise in ourselves, to interrupt the conversation, or to shift the subject. While it's a simple gift, it's a gift that needs intentional practice. Not to mention, true embodied listening takes a lot of energy. Our society is one that doesn't always prize listening itself, with interrupting, speaking, and listening to respond being highly valued instead. It takes a lot to be fully present, taking in and listening to all of these different sensations and feelings. From one of our rich spiritual sources as Unitarian Universalists, embodied listening has roots that are deep in the Buddhist tradition. Matt, if I could have you show the photo on the screen for us today. Let's see, wonderful. So this is a statue of Milarepa, an 11th century Tibetan poet and Buddhist master of meditation. In this image, you'll notice that Milarepa is shown listening with his entire body sitting upright. His head is leaning to one side, with curled fingers brought to his ear, helping him to hear even the softest of sounds. Milarepa was known to be a sorcerer using spells to harm many people. And in sorrow for his past deeds after reflecting, he turned to a Buddhist teacher in order to change his life. After practicing meditation for many years, Milarepa attained enlightenment through this deep listening. He experienced reality in its fullness, finding that his body held answers he had been searching for his whole entire life. Thanks, Matt. Now, I share this photo not because I can promise you enlightenment, though some of you who resonate with Buddhist teachings may believe that this is possible with enough practice. Embodied listening is a practice with deep, rich spiritual roots. Milarepa learns that it's by listening that he can fully encounter and experience life. And this deep encounter with something greater than himself brings him to a state of nirvana, or an eventual state of liberation from suffering. This strand of spiritual wisdom from Buddhism informs what we do as Unitarian Universalists. As people of faith, we are on the path to live full and meaningful lives in community with one another. We covenant to care for one another as we work together to create a better world. We care about our relationships to each other, our wider communities, and our planet. Our search for meaning calls us to form meaning from many different spiritual sources, wherever we might encounter wisdom, truth, and understanding. Embodied listening is a tool that can help us to live more fully into our covenant and our values as a faith. And as something that's oriented toward liberation from suffering, embodied listening poses a way that we might bear witness to others, especially those who are at the margins. And while we may never fully be able to understand the suffering of another or the experiences of someone whose lived experience is so different from our own, we can still cultivate a posture of listening to ourselves and to others that is transformative and grounded in a goal of liberation. In our country and world, we see the many ways that things are not as they should be. This past week, we saw the first glimpses of accountability for police with the conviction of Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd. While this is a step on the long road toward justice, we know that justice itself is far off. Justice would have been George coming home to his family, being able to care for his growing 5 children. Justice would have been living a full and free life without the fear of violence or prejudice. Justice would have prevented the death of 16-year-old Ma'Khia Bryant in Columbus, Ohio, that very same day, as well as the countless other deaths that happen each week. Justice would mean that Black lives truly matter, that they are valued and protected, and justice would ultimately mean liberation. So while embodied listening is powerful, it's also a challenging transformation. Living into lives of embodied listening often involves radical structural and societal shifts. And instead of promoting this architecture of speaking, it creates instead an architecture of listening. It teaches us to take up less space and to bring with ourselves more awareness. Just imagine how different our world would be if we took seriously opportunities to understand rather than just listening to respond. In my visits with the woman in the hospital that I spoke earlier about, I learned that my being fully present depended on the ways in which I was taking care of myself and paying attention to what I needed. It involved taking lots of deep breaths or a nap if I could manage one. It meant leaning on my spiritual practice of meditation to sustain me, even when I doubted if it could. When I felt the burn of fatigue, it meant honoring that it felt like I was hitting a brick wall at times, my body telling me that I couldn't go any further that day. I realized that I couldn't be present for this woman without being present to my own embodied being. And embodied listening starts first with ourselves before we can begin the transformation for the world around us. In Kate's Time for All Ages, as well as Suzanne's powerful meditation, we got to practice listening to our bodies and bringing within ourselves a mindful and present awareness. Finding space to bring and practice embodied listening throughout our daily lives is something that we can find everywhere. There are opportunities all around us to check in with ourselves, to breathe deeply, to listen with our full bodies, and to show up present and authentic to others. In this time of pandemic, in this urgent moment in our country and world, you, like me, might be feeling the weariness of everything. of feeling exhausted after a year of social distancing, of noticing just how far we must bend the arc of the moral universe before it arrives at liberation and justice. My hope is that you found some comfort in these words. Your body holds so much wisdom. What we need now more than ever is to listen deeply to what's on our minds, bodies, hearts, and spirits. And in doing this, we might find the resilience needed in our long path and journey toward beloved community. As we listen to others and the world around us, may we start by listening within ourselves. May we honor the lived experiences of ourselves with compassion, just as we strive to honor the experiences of others. And in this time now, as the world continues turning, and we find ourselves weary and daunted by the tasks ahead, may we be ready to bring liberation into the here and now through deep listening and truth-telling. It is only by first listening with our bodies that we might transform the world. May it be so, and amen. We'll now go to Emily Molchek for our closing hymn, Life Has a Loveliness to Sell.